2017 was a hard year for Xbox fans. Persona 5, Horizon Zero Dawn, and Breath of the Wild never came to the platform. Sony and even Nintendo had stellar showings, and it seemed to wound the collective Xbox consciousness throughout the year, as one by one the once dominant Microsoft suffered lackluster exclusive releases, if any at all. The exceptions came in smaller titles, Cuphead being the resonant example of perfection on a smaller scale. 2018 seems off to the same start as last year for Xbox, however, with Sea of Thieves launching with little to no content and no real progression system, an issue somewhat assuaged by the two major updates which were made available post-launch, one of which drops in September. In this same time period, Sony released one of the best exclusives of all time with God of War. May's exclusive release for Xbox, State of Decay 2, was a massively buggy disappointment, to even the most hardcore fans of the original, myself included. Sony's May release, Detroit Become Human, while by most accounts was not a stellar game, actively functioned upon release and told a semi-interesting and contained story, which had redeeming qualities. While these two titles are nothing alike, both launching at the same time matters. Detroit is a choose-your-own-adventure style narrative with branching paths which put player agency at the forefront, whereas State of Decay 2 is a survival game with management sim priorities and permadeath. They're clearly different titles, so why compare them? Why mention them in the same breath? To see where Xbox is failing on an exclusive level is to gaze at Sony and see what they are doing right. PlayStation sells narratives. Xbox sells stories. On Xbox, when you purchase a game, it is more often than not multiplayer centric. Sure, there may be a single player and it may even be great, but it's never the forefront of the title. I adore Halo, and it's easily one of my favorite franchises ever, but those games are not designed from a narrative first standpoint. Multiplayer is king. This is true with almost every AAA release exclusive to the platform, with a few exceptions we will get into in a moment. You play the campaign, wrap some achievements, and then hop directly into multiplayer where you go on to spend most of your time, and when the games don't have a narrative, the multiplayer doubles for it in much the same way. These games, and the bulk of modern Xbox releases, are sold on the promise of shared experiences with friends. Adventures you'll embark upon, and stories you'll remember for years to come. Yet, and this is where Xbox stumbles, this form of experience has become the dominant force, overtaking traditional storytelling, which is both an advancement and a regression. Sure, the adventures are far more complex and have greater potential to be fantastical, but games have been this form of storytelling for decades, all the way back to high-score chasing in the days of the arcade. We as players are familiar with this unique and engaging storyhood and champion it, but cannot and should not be the sole focus for any platform. When you're the one telling the story, you're not tied to one platform. Sure, I may have had a plethora of crazy adventures in Sea of Thieves at launch, but I can play any number of games on any number of systems and have crazy adventures with friends all the same. It's the stories that you yourself cannot tell that highlight the system they reside on. You can only experience the story of God of War, Horizon Zero Dawn, or The Last of Us on PlayStation. There is no other place to play games of this narrative magnitude and polish, and there is something genuinely powerful about that. When I look at my Xbox, I see great times with friends, but I don't feel the pull to experience a great story like I do when a PlayStation exclusive is about to drop. And it wasn't always like this. Sure, Microsoft's been selling stories since they launched the Xbox in 2001, but the scale and scope hasn't remained consistent. Multiplayer has always, and likely will always be, what Microsoft is best at. Say what you will about Sony having this generation's lockdown on multiplayer IP. Xbox is still the best place to play games like Destiny and Call of Duty, despite their marketing and content partnerships. The controller is far more conducive to shooters, and most importantly, the network is solid and reliable. For every 100 times the PSN refuses to work or install an update, the Xbox will fail once, if that. It's an unsurprising factor considering Microsoft owns their own Azure server farms and has been running solid and fast online services for the console since 2004. So it's not surprising to see their titles have reflected this throughout the lifespan of the Xbox brand. Yet, occasionally a title makes its exclusive debut on the platform that rebuffs the idea of a multiplayer or online connected portion. A title which focuses on narrative and narrative alone. A game that, despite its console compatriots, offers one thing: a well-told story with believable and dimensional characters. One such game? 2010's Alan Wake.
My name is Alan Wake. I'm a writer. I came to Bright Falls with my wife, Alice. I told myself I could rest here, sleep here, and forget about my work.
Released on the same day as Red Dead Redemption, Split Second, and Prince of Persia, it tells the story of a successful crime writer suffering the inability to produce a follow-up to his best-selling thriller series, leaving the confines of his apartment in New York to visit the idyllic and small town of Bright Falls, Washington at the request of his wife, Alice. However, unbeknownst to them, Bright Falls is a mystical place, and an ancient darkness is awoken by Alan in his ability to create. To say too much more is to spoil one of the best narrative experiences I personally have ever had, something for a later video maybe. The important thing to note is Alan Wake is solely a narrative experience. There's no multiplayer. Further, the first of 2 DLC episodes, which take place in a reality straight out of David Lynch's head, came free with the game, the second releasing in the fall of 2010 for 800 Microsoft points, or $10 in real money. Originally, the DLC series was to be a 5-part lead into the next game, but due to poor sales, the plan was cut back to the aforementioned 2. Now, from Microsoft's point of view, I believe they saw this as a failure due to the fact there was no multiplayer segment of the game, despite it being a AAA console exclusive. Remember, at this point, every title releasing had a shoehorned in multiplayer mode, when in reality, they had sent the game out to die against one of the best-selling games of the generation. Releasing Alan Wake almost any other week in 2010 would have resulted in far better sales for the title, rather than sizing it up against such a juggernaut. From this point forward, it appears almost every console exclusive put out by Microsoft were in one way or another a multiplayer experience with narrative taking a backseat. Halo Reach featured an incredible story with a likable cast and an interesting premise, but it was clear the real hook for the title was the multiplayer, and this would further become the theme of the decade on the console. Miraculously, Remedy Entertainment was allowed to create another single-player story-focused title with the condition it contributed to the launch of the Xbox One's all-encompassing media platform. Something I believe Remedy would have been on board with regardless thanks to their love of cross-media works visible in Alan Wake's full-motion segments and the arcade follow-up Alan Wake's American Nightmare, utilizing live actors for the cutscenes. While they were allowed to create a second narrative-focused title, they were not given the go-ahead on Alan Wake 2, and instead released Quantum Break in the spring of 2016. Meanwhile, in the same span of time, Sony has released titles that have had the adverse effect, where the story is the main course and for many the multiplayer is a bonus for the invested, rather than the driving force of the purchase. While none of the Uncharted titles' multiplayer suites play like an afterthought or feel poorly put together, they aren't why you anticipate or buy an Uncharted game. The story and the characters are what sell the product, and this is true for almost every Sony exclusive outside of a few specific games. Sony has built up a solid roster of character-driven stories with individuals people genuinely care about. Nathan Drake, Joel and Ellie, Ratchet and Kratos, Atreus, the list goes on. Meanwhile, as much as I love my Xbox, I know most people can't name characters outside of Master Chief, Cortana, and if we're reaching Marcus. There appears to be a lack of passion for establishing brand identity beyond playing multiplayer titles together on Xbox, and for many, it leads to a lack of investment in the platform as a whole. While Master Chief ironically was the face of Xbox from 2001 to 2012, if we're being generous once again, Sony has always had a rotating cast of icons that convey what the console's about in the same way Nintendo has since 1984. While I agree as a whole Xbox needs more exclusive titles, they also need more titles that speak to what Xbox is as a brand. The Sea of Thieves pirates, Squirrel Thing from Blinks the Squirrel Boy or whatever that game was that came out last year, the cover art car from Forza Horizon 3, and beanie wearing girl from Gears 5 feel generic and bland. For Xbox to succeed in the future, I believe that there needs to be a reinvestment in storytelling, character development, and narrative exploration. Focusing purely on multiplayer is a losing battle, especially with so many multi-platform games like Fortnite, Destiny, The Division, Warframe, and Overwatch dominating that space. The perfect example of this is the biggest game in the world right now, Fortnite. It's available on everything from iOS to Xbox, and as such, every platform it's available on dominates players' conversations. If Fortnite was an Xbox exclusive, do you honestly believe it would have even a fraction as large a community as it currently does? No, of course not. Fortnite succeeds because it's available everywhere, whereas a game like Halo 5 isn't even in the conversation anymore because it's landlocked to the Xbox One, which already ensures a limited audience when compared to its contemporary third-party brethren. At this point in the cycle of gaming, a console-exclusive multiplayer game is doomed to fail. Yes, you can put it out on the Microsoft Store on PC as well, but that's hardly going to inflate the player base, as it's obvious when looking at games like Gears of War 4 or Forza Horizon 3. Live service appears to be here to stay, and as such, Xbox needs to learn to adjust on a multitude of levels. Build your experiences accordingly. Know that a game like God of War is going to come out and do incredibly well financially, and then drop out of the conversation a month later because Fortnite is dominating once again. Don't give up and never put out a multiplayer-only title, but diversify and cater to more than one kind of player. Games are growing and changing. Xbox as a brand, in second, is growing and changing. Agree with me, disagree, have something to say about the topic at hand, or have a suggestion for a future video? Drop a comment below and subscribe if you are so inclined. I'm just appreciative that you're here. Thanks again, see you in the next one.